Have you ever been crushed by someone whose only qualification was being born into the right family? I have. He thought his title as the CEO's son gave him absolute power over everyone beneath him. He could destroy careers with a smirk, ruin lives with a signature, and sleep soundly knowing daddy would clean up his messes. But power built on bloodlines instead of merit has one fatal flaw. It can disappear overnight. And when it did, that's when my revenge story truly began. My name is Emily Carter. And until 6 months ago, I believed hard work and dedication actually meant something in corporate America. At 29, I was the youngest marketing director Novalink Solutions had ever promoted. And I'd earned every bit of that title through 60-hour weeks. Innovative campaigns that tripled our market share, and a genuine passion for what we were building in Hartfield, Colorado. Novalink wasn't Silicon Valley glamorous, but that's what I loved about it. Nestled in the foothills outside Denver, our mid-sized tech company had felt different, more authentic, more human. The morning mountain air that drifted through our office windows seemed to promise that here, merit mattered more than connections. God, I was naive. I remember my first day 5 years ago, walking into that glass building with my coffee-stained portfolio and bargain rack blazer, determined to prove myself. And I did. Campaign after campaign, I climbed from junior coordinator to team lead to department head. My walls at home were covered with company awards, photos from team celebrations, thank you notes from clients. I'd pour myself into strategy documents until 2 a.m., not because anyone asked me to, but because I believed in what we were creating. The office was my second home. Hell, it was more of a home than my actual apartment. I knew every security guard by name, had a preferred parking spot that everyone respectfully left empty, and could navigate our floor blindfolded. My team of 12 looked to me, not just as a boss, but as a mentor. I'd built something here, piece by piece, relationship by relationship. Then Brian Wallace arrived. I'll never forget that Monday morning in March when CEO Robert Wallace called an all-hands meeting. Robert had been running Novalink for 15 years, transforming it from a startup to a multi-million-dollar operation. He was the kind of CEO you could respect, until he announced his son would be joining as Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations. Brian walked in wearing a suit that cost more than most employees' monthly salary, flashing a smile that never reached his eyes. 32 years old, fresh from what his father called extensive experience in our European markets. But what everyone whispered was actually an extended vacation funded by Daddy's credit cards. I'm excited to bring fresh perspectives to Novalink, Brian had said, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who'd never had to earn anyone's attention. I look forward to optimizing our operations and taking this company to the next level. Optimize. That should have been my first warning. Within his first week, Brian had commandeered the corner conference room as his personal office, despite 3 departments needing it for client calls. Within 2 weeks, he'd reversed 2 years of my carefully built influencer partnerships because he didn't see the ROI. Within a month, he was sitting in on my department meetings, interrupting my presentations to share his insights that usually amounted to whatever business podcast he'd half listened to that morning. But I still believed in the system. I still thought that competence would win over nepotism. I documented everything, delivered results that exceeded every quota, and maintained my professionalism even when Brian would lean back in his chair during my presentations, scrolling through his phone like I was background noise. Emily's great with the day-to-day stuff, he'd said once to a client while I was standing right there. But strategic vision, that's why I'm here. The client had looked confused. They'd specifically requested to work with me based on my reputation. But Brian's last name was Wallace, and in Novalink Solutions, that name was carved into the building's foundation. Looking back now, I should have seen the end coming, should have recognized that in this gleaming Colorado office, with its modern furniture and progressive policies, we were still playing by rules as old as capitalism itself. The son had arrived to claim his throne, and there was only room for one vision at Novalink, his. But I was Emily Carter. I'd built my career on exceeding expectations and proving doubters wrong. I wasn't going to let some trust fund prince destroy everything I'd worked for. I had no idea he'd already decided to destroy me first. The first real clash came during the Phoenix digital campaign. We'd been courting them for 6 months. A $3 million account that would establish Novalink as a serious player in the fintech space. I'd personally flown to Arizona 4 times, built relationships with their entire C-suite, and crafted a proposal that addressed every one of their pain points. The presentation was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. I'd rehearsed it until I could deliver it in my sleep. Wednesday afternoon. Brian strolled into my office without knocking. "Hey, Emma." "Emily." "Right, Emily. About tomorrow's Phoenix thing, I'll be taking the lead." I felt my stomach drop. "The presentation is tomorrow. The client specifically requested..." "They requested Novalink's best," he interrupted, picking up my stress ball and tossing it between his hands. "And as SVP of Strategic Operations, that's me. Don't worry, you can still attend. Someone needs to handle the technical questions." I watched him squeeze my stress ball, his manicured nails digging into the foam. "Brian, I've been managing this relationship for 6 months. They trust me. Changing presenters at the last minute could..." "Could what?" His voice carried that dangerous edge of someone who'd never been told no. "Make them question our leadership structure? Make them wonder why the marketing director thinks she outranks the senior vice president?" The way he emphasized his title made my skin crawl, but I had a team to protect, budgets to maintain, careers to nurture. So I swallowed my pride and handed over my presentation materials. The meeting was a disaster. Brian stumbled through slides he'd barely reviewed, mispronounced the CEO's name twice, and when asked about implementation timelines, he just smiled and said, "Emily can handle those details later. Phoenix Digital chose our competitor. Win some, lose some." Brian shrugged in the debrief, already scrolling through his phone. "The presentation was solid, Emily, but maybe next time, make it more executive-friendly." My presentation, that he'd butchered, was now somehow my failure. But the Phoenix Digital fiasco was just the beginning. Brian had a talent for appearing engaged while absorbing nothing, making decisions based on whatever caught his attention in the moment. He'd override months of market research because he had a feeling. He'd promise clients impossible deliverables because it sounded impressive, then disappear when we scrambled to deliver. During a crucial product launch meeting, he actually took a FaceTime call from his girlfriend, leaving 15 of us sitting in silence for 10 minutes. When our chief technology officer tried to continue without him, Brian ended his call just long enough to snap, "Did I say you could start without me?" The CTO, a brilliant woman named Sarah who'd built our entire back-end infrastructure, just nodded and sat down. We all did. Because Brian was the CEO's son. And in this ecosystem, that made him untouchable. But what really revealed his true nature was how he treated the junior staff. He'd make the interns fetch his specific coffee order from a shop 20 minutes away, in Denver traffic. He called our receptionist sweetheart despite multiple HR complaints. He once made a junior developer cry by publicly berating him for a typo in an internal email. "Standards matter," Brian had said, standing over the kid's desk. "If you can't handle attention to detail, maybe this isn't the right fit for you." This from a man who'd misspelled synergy in 3 consecutive board presentations. I started documenting everything in a folder I labeled insurance. Screenshots of his contradictory emails, recordings of meetings where he'd take credit for other people's work, testimonials from team members he'd bullied. I wasn't planning anything yet, just protecting myself and my team. But protection wasn't enough when Brian decided you were a threat. The breaking point came during the Morrison Industries pitch. They were my white whale, a $5 million account I'd been cultivating for 2 years. The CEO, Janet Morrison, had specifically said she'd only work with Novalink if I personally managed their account. It should have been my triumph. Brian scheduled a strategy session an hour before the pitch. When I walked into the conference room, he was already there with Robert Wallace and 2 board members. "Emily." Brian smiled, that shark smile I'd learned to fear. We need to talk about your leadership style. Your leadership style, Brian repeated, sliding a folder across the conference table. We've been receiving complaints. My hand stayed steady as I opened it. Inside were emails, my emails, but edited, words rearranged, context removed. Messages where I'd pushed back on Brian's terrible ideas were reframed as insubordination. My warnings about missed deadlines became pessimistic attitudes affecting team morale. This is fabricated, I said, looking directly at Robert Wallace. These emails have been altered. I have the originals. Emily. Robert's voice was tired, disappointed, the voice of a father who'd already chosen his side. Brian has raised serious concerns about your ability to collaborate with senior leadership. The Morrison Industries meeting is in 45 minutes. I tried. Janet Morrison specifically, which is why Brian will be handling the presentation. Robert interrupted. We need someone who understands the bigger picture. Brian's smile widened. Don't worry, Emily. You can sit in the back, take notes, maybe learn something about executive presence. The humiliation burned through me like acid. 2 board members sat there, stone-faced, watching my career implode. One of them, Margaret Chen, had mentored me for years. She wouldn't meet my eyes. This is about the Phoenix digital loss, isn't it? I kept my voice level. Brian, you took over that presentation. And you failed to prepare adequate materials. Brian cut in smoothly. Just like you failed to properly manage the Morrison relationship. Janet Morrison called yesterday. She expressed concerns about your aggressive approach. Lies. All lies. Janet had texted me that morning confirming our lunch plans for next week, but I saw it in their faces. The decision was already made. This meeting wasn't a discussion, it was an execution. We think it's best if you take a step back, Robert said, effective immediately. You'll be transitioning your responsibilities to Brian. We'll find another position for you. Perhaps something in customer service? Customer service. From marketing director to answering complaint calls. And if I refuse? Brian leaned back, savoring the moment. Then we'll have to consider this a resignation. Without references? Without severance? Your choice. Emily. The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Outside, I could hear my team preparing for Morrison Industries, unaware their leader was being gutted in a conference room 30 feet away. I need time to think, I managed. The Morrison meeting is in 30 minutes, Brian said, checking his Rolex. Decide quickly. I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady. As I reached the door, Brian's voice followed me. Oh, and Emily, the Morrison presentation materials. I'll need those now. I turned back, saw him holding out his hand like I was his assistant. The 2 board members were already checking their phones, mentally moving on. Robert Wallace was staring out the window at the mountains, avoiding the messy business of watching his son destroy someone's life. They're on the shared drive, I said. The password? Phoenix 2024. I watched his face flicker with recognition, the campaign he'd destroyed. I walked back to my office in a daze. My team barely looked up, focused on last-minute preparations. My assistant, Jennifer, handed me a coffee. 15 minutes until showtime, she chirped. Janet Morrison's assistant just confirmed they're in the lobby. I didn't tell her, didn't tell any of them. Just sat at my desk and watched Brian swagger past with my presentation materials, winking at me through the glass wall. The Morrison meeting was a catastrophe. Brian confused their quarterly projections with Phoenix Digital's, called Janet Jane, twice. And when asked about implementation strategies, he actually said, My team will figure that out. I'm more of a big-picture guy. Janet Morrison walked out 20 minutes into the hour-long presentation. By 4 p.m., Brian was back in my office. That was unfortunate, he said, perching on my desk, crushing my quarterly reports under his designer shoes. The presentation materials were clearly inadequate. The board's going to want answers. You're firing me. It wasn't a question. Firing is such a harsh word. Let's call it a strategic reorganization. He picked up the photo of my team at last year's Christmas party. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out in 10 minutes. Don't make a scene, Emily. It's unprofessional. Unprofessional, after everything he'd done. Why? I asked. What did I ever do to you? Brian set down the photo, his mask slipping for just a moment. You made people think you were better than me. That ends today. Security arrived. Tom, who I'd bought coffee for every Friday for 3 years. He couldn't meet my eyes as he watched me pack my desk into a cardboard box. 5 years reduced to a box of personal items and a escorted walk of shame. My team watched through the glass walls, horrified, confused. Jennifer started to stand up, but I shook my head. They needed their jobs. As Tom walked me through the lobby, past the awards wall where my photo hung 3 times, Brian's voice echoed from the Morrison conference room. Going forward, I'll be personally overseeing all major accounts. The Colorado sun was setting as I stood in the parking lot, holding my pathetic box, watching the building I'd loved turn its lights on for the evening. Through the windows, I could see Brian in my office, my former office, feet up on my desk, laughing into his phone. I'd lost everything to a man who'd earned nothing. But standing there, something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. Brian Wallace thought he'd destroyed me. He had no idea what he'd actually created. The first week, I kept expecting to wake up. My phone alarm would go off at 5:45 a.m., and I'd reach for my work clothes before remembering I had nowhere to go. The muscle memory of 5 years doesn't disappear overnight. Neither does the humiliation. My severance was a joke. 2 weeks' pay, contingent on signing an NDA that would prevent me from discussing the circumstances of my departure. I refused to sign. That meant no unemployment benefits, no references. And my savings would last maybe 3 months if I cut everything but essentials. The apartment that had once felt cozy now felt like a prison. A 1-bedroom in Hartfield's Arts District that cost $1,800 a month. Reasonable on a marketing director's salary. Impossible on nothing. I spent hours on job sites, but word travels fast in Colorado's tech scene. Every application I submitted seemed to disappear into a void. Then Jennifer called on week 2, whispering from a Novalink bathroom stall. Emily, I shouldn't be calling, but you need to know. Brian's telling everyone you had a breakdown. Says you were stealing client information, that they had to escort you out for corporate espionage. My coffee mug shattered against the kitchen wall before I realized I'd thrown it. That's not all, Jennifer continued. He's blacklisting you. Any company that calls for references, he personally tells them you're unstable, dangerous. Lisa from Tech Forward told me they were going to offer you a position until Brian called their CEO. After Jennifer hung up, I sat among the coffee stains and ceramic shards, finally understanding the full scope of Brian's cruelty. He didn't just want me gone, he wanted me erased. The calls from former colleagues slowed, then stopped. My LinkedIn connections quietly severed ties. Even Sarah, the CTO who'd suffered under Brian's tyranny, wouldn't return my texts. I understood. They had mortgages, families, their own careers to protect. In the ecosystem of Novalink, associating with me was career suicide. By week 3, the walls started closing in. The landlord left a notice. Rent was due in 7 days. The grocery budget shrank to ramen and peanut butter. I sold my good jewelry, then my furniture, then my pride, applying for cashier positions at Target, barista jobs at Starbucks. Even they didn't call back. Rock bottom has a specific sound. It's not dramatic. It's the quiet click of declining a call from your mother because you can't bear to tell her you're a failure. It's the hum of an empty refrigerator in an apartment you can't afford. It's the silence of a phone that used to ring constantly with opportunities and now sits dead as a stone. I found myself at Confluence Park one evening, watching the South Platte River merge with Cherry Creek. The water was dark, moving fast with spring runoff. I stood at the railing, not thinking about jumping, just thinking about nothing, about becoming nothing, about how easy it would be to just stop fighting. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Emily Carter? Yes? My name is David Miller. I'm an investigative journalist with the Denver Post. I've been following the situation at Novalink Solutions. I think we should talk. I signed in. I started, then remembered. Actually, no, I didn't sign anything. I know, David said. That's why I'm calling. Can we meet? Tomorrow. 10 a.m., the coffee shop on Wincoop? David Miller looked like every investigative journalist in every movie. Rumpled shirt, tired eyes, laptop covered in coffee rings. But his handshake was firm, and his gaze was sharp when he said, "Brian Wallace destroyed your career. Want to return the favor?" I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. He pulled out a tablet, showing me an article he'd written 6 months ago about Wallace Enterprises' suspicious acquisition patterns. Robert Wallace built his empire on stepping on people like you. His son is just following the family playbook. But they're getting sloppy. Even if that's true, what can I do? I'm nobody now. I can't even get a job at a coffee shop. David leaned forward. You have something Brian doesn't know you have. You have receipts. And more importantly, you have nothing left to lose. He was right about one thing. I had nothing left to lose. But I had something else, too. That folder labeled insurance wasn't at Novalink. It was in my cloud storage. Every damning email, every recorded meeting, every piece of evidence of Brian's incompetence and cruelty. What would you need from me? I asked. Everything. Every document, every witness who might talk, every dirty secret you learned in 5 years at Novalink. In return, I protect you as a source. And when the story breaks, Brian Wallace won't be able to blacklist anyone ever again. I thought about Jennifer, whispering from bathroom stalls. About Sarah, brilliant and defeated. About the junior developer Brian had broken. About my empty refrigerator and my dying career and the river that had looked so inviting. There's more, David said quietly. Wallace Enterprises is about to announce a merger with Morrison Industries. Janet Morrison doesn't know what Brian did to you. She thinks you voluntarily left. Might be interesting if she learned the truth. Morrison Industries, the whale I'd spent 2 years hunting, now swimming straight into Brian's net. I looked at David Miller, this rumpled stranger offering me a weapon I hadn't known existed, the truth. When do we start? I asked. Now, he said, opening his laptop. Tell me everything. For the first time in a month, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been pushed off a cliff and discovered she could fly. Brian Wallace had made one crucial mistake. He'd left me alive. And now, I was going to make him regret it. David's apartment became our war room. Unlike the pristine Novalink conference rooms, this space was chaos. Documents covering every surface, 3 computer monitors displaying financial records, whiteboards mapped with corporate connections that looked like conspiracy theories until you realized they were all true. Wallace Enterprises isn't just one company, David explained, tracing connections on his board. It's a web. Novalink is just one strand. Your former CEO Robert Wallace has been using it to inflate valuations across his entire portfolio. How? Ghost contracts. Novalink reports revenue from deals that exist only on paper, boosting the parent company's stock price. Brian's incompetence is actually useful. He's too stupid to realize he's signing fraudulent documents. I stared at the evidence David had gathered over 2 years. SEC filings with suspicious patterns, invoices for services never rendered, employee testimonies he'd collected but couldn't corroborate. This is bigger than just Brian being an asshole, I said. Much bigger. But I've hit walls. Former employees are too scared to go on record. Current ones won't even return my calls. He turned to me. Until now, you're the first person with both access and motivation to burn it all down. I opened my laptop, accessing the insurance folder. I have 18 months of Brian's emails, meeting recordings, but David, most of this just proves he's incompetent, not criminal. Show me everything. You'd be surprised what patterns emerge. We worked through the night, fueled by gas station coffee and cold pizza. Every document I'd saved as protection revealed another piece of the puzzle. Brian's strange insistence on personally approving certain vendors, all shell companies. His father's unexpected visits that coincided with major contract announcements, the way certain financial reports were always delayed until after board meetings. At 3 a.m., Jennifer texted me. Brian just announced he's taking over Morrison account personally, claiming he rescued it after you sabotaged it. Makes me sick. Morrison. Janet Morrison, who'd trusted me, who didn't know she was about to merge with a criminal enterprise. I need to warn Janet, I said. David looked up from his laptop. That could backfire if she confronts them before we publish. She deserves to know. Emily, revenge requires patience. This isn't just about revenge anymore. I pulled up Janet's LinkedIn profile. She built her company from nothing. She has 300 employees. If this merger goes through and Wallace Enterprises implodes, she loses everything. David studied me. You're right. But we do this smart. Don't contact her directly. Brian's probably monitoring your communications. I have a source at Morrison Industries. Let me make the introduction. The source was Marcus Chen, Morrison's CFO, a soft-spoken man who'd already had doubts about the merger. The numbers don't add up, he admitted when we met at a diner outside Denver. Wallace Enterprises' valuation seems inflated, but our board is dazzled by the growth potential. I slid him a flash drive. Brian Wallace personally falsified these reports. Your CEO needs to see this before she signs anything. Marcus went pale reviewing the files. This is... Jesus. Janet's signing ceremony is next week. Big public announcement. Press, investors, everyone. Perfect, David said. Let her see the evidence. If she pulls out publicly, it raises questions. Journalists start digging. The SEC takes notice. And Brian? I asked. Brian's about to learn what happens when you build a throne on quicksand. We had 4 days. David worked his journalism contacts, preparing them for a major story. Marcus fed information to Janet Morrison, carefully, strategically. And I did something I'd sworn I wouldn't. I reached out to my old team. Jennifer responded first, then Sarah, then the junior developer Brian had humiliated. One by one, they shared their stories, their evidence, their anger. We met in secret, in parks and parking garages, building a case that would destroy Brian's carefully constructed lies. He made me doctor user engagement numbers, one developer admitted, said it was optimistic forecasting. He had me create fake testimonials from clients who didn't exist, a designer revealed. I processed invoices for services we never provided, an accountant whispered, millions of dollars worth. Each revelation was another nail in Brian's coffin. But the masterpiece came from an unexpected source, Margaret Chen, the board member who'd sat silent during my execution. She called me at midnight, 3 days before the merger announcement. Emily, I'm sorry. For everything, I should have stood up for you. Why didn't you? A long pause. Robert Wallace has dirt on everyone, but I'm retiring next month. I'm done being afraid. She took a breath. I have recordings, board meetings where Robert explicitly instructed Brian to inflate numbers, where they discussed destroying you because you were too smart, too ethical, too dangerous. Why record them? Insurance, just like you. The final piece. David had his story. Janet had her evidence. The board had a ticking bomb. And Brian? Brian had no idea his kingdom was built on testimony from every person he'd stepped on to reach his throne. The merger announcement was scheduled for Friday, 2 p.m., at the Four Seasons downtown. Brian had been bragging about it all week, according to Jennifer, his coronation as the prince of an empire. Thursday night, I stood at the same spot in Confluence Park where I'd contemplated ending everything. The water still rushed by, dark and indifferent. But I wasn't looking for an escape anymore. I was watching a storm gather. And tomorrow, Brian Wallace would learn what it felt like to drown. The beauty of destroying someone who thinks they're untouchable is watching them build their own pyre. Brian didn't need me to push him off his pedestal. I just needed to hand him enough rope. Thursday morning, I sent Brian an anonymous email from a burner account. Congratulations on the Morrison merger. Your father must be so proud. Some journalists have been asking questions about Novalink's Q3 numbers. Might want to check with accounting. Jennifer told me later that Brian spent the entire morning terrorizing the accounting department, demanding they fix numbers that were already fictitious. He created such chaos that 2 senior accountants quit on the spot. More witnesses for David's story. But the real manipulation was simpler. Through Marcus, I learned Brian was planning to take personal credit for the merger at tomorrow's announcement. Robert Wallace would introduce his son as the architect of this historic partnership. Brian had even written his own speech, filled with lies about how he'd salvaged the Morrison relationship after previous mismanagement. I made sure Janet Morrison received a copy of that speech 12 hours early. Her response was swift. She called an emergency board meeting at Morrison Industries. Marcus later told me she'd walked in, thrown Brian's speech on the table, and said, "If this lying piece of shit thinks he's touching my company, he's delusional." But she didn't cancel the announcement. That was the genius of Janet Morrison. She understood that public humiliation was worse than private defeat. Friday morning, David's first article went live at 6 a.m. Questions arise about Wallace Enterprises' financial reporting. It was careful, factual, just enough to make investors nervous. By 9 a.m., Wallace Enterprises' stock had dropped 12%. Brian, according to Jennifer's play-by-play texts, was frantically trying to do damage control. He called an all-hands meeting at Novalink, standing at the podium where he'd once announced my termination. "This is fake news," he declared. "Jealous competitors trying to sabotage our success. The merger announcement this afternoon will shut them all up." He had no idea Janet Morrison was already in Denver, meeting with federal investigators at that very moment. At noon, I sat in my empty apartment, watching the clock. In 2 hours, Brian would stand at that Four Seasons podium, his father beside him, cameras rolling, and discover what I'd learned in that parking lot 6 weeks ago, that your whole world can end in a single moment. Jennifer Liv texted me from Novalink. "Brian just left for the Four Seasons, new suit, actually practiced his speech, he has no idea." 1:30 p.m. Margaret's recordings leaked to 3 major news outlets. 1:45 p.m. The SEC announced an investigation into Wallace Enterprises. 1:55 p.m. Janet Morrison arrived at the Four Seasons. 2:00 p.m. Showtime. I watched the live stream from my laptop. The ballroom was packed, investors, journalists, employees from both companies. Robert Wallace took the podium first, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. "Today marks a historic moment for Wallace Enterprises," he began. But his confidence faltered as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones were buzzing. The second article had just dropped. SEC investigation confirmed, Wallace Enterprises under federal scrutiny. Brian stood behind his father, his practiced smile beginning to crack. He kept checking his phone, his face growing paler with each notification. Then Janet Morrison took the stage. "I'm here to announce," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "that Morrison Industries will not be moving forward with this merger." The room exploded, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. Robert Wallace stood frozen, his empire crumbling on live television. But Janet wasn't done. "I'd also like to address the lies spread about Emily Carter, the former marketing director who was wrongfully terminated from Novalink Solutions. Emily didn't sabotage any deal. She was removed because she refused to participate in fraudulent business practices." She looked directly at Brian. "Mr. Wallace Jr. is not a business visionary. He's a liability who destroyed one of the most talented professionals I've ever worked with because his ego couldn't handle her competence." Brian's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. His father grabbed his arm, trying to pull him off stage, but Brian yanked away, grabbing the microphone. "This is all lies. Emily Carter was incompetent. She was right about you, Janet interrupted. And thanks to her courage in coming forward, Morrison Industries avoided a catastrophic mistake. The SEC agents entered the ballroom then, their presence killing any remaining pretense that this was just a business setback. This was a crime scene. Jennifer's final text was a photo. Brian being escorted out of the Four Seasons, his new suit wrinkled, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. He kept saying, "Do you know who my father is?" They knew. That's why they were there. By 5 p.m., Wallace Enterprises stock had lost 60% of its value. By Monday, Robert Wallace would resign in disgrace. By the end of the month, Brian would be facing federal charges for fraud. But that afternoon, I wasn't watching the news coverage or reading the flood of messages from former colleagues suddenly remembering my number. I was packing what little I still owned into boxes. David had connected me with a tech startup in Austin, a company that actually valued competence over connections. They'd offered me a position starting Monday. Not as senior as my old role, but honest, clean, mine. As I taped up the last box, my phone rang. Brian Wallace. I let it go to voicemail. "You destroyed everything," his message said, his voice raw with rage. "My career, my father's company, everything. I hope you're happy." I deleted it without listening to the end. His anger was just noise now. The tantrum of a child who'd finally been told no. He thought I'd destroyed everything. He was wrong. I'd simply told the truth. And sometimes, for people like Brian Wallace, that's the most destructive force of all. The collapse was spectacular, even by corporate scandal standards. Over the weekend, the full scope of Wallace Enterprises' fraud unraveled like a cheap suit in the rain. Federal agents raided their offices Saturday morning, carrying out boxes of evidence while news crews filmed every humiliating second. But Brian wasn't done fighting. Sunday evening, he went on a local news show, sweating under studio lights, desperately trying to salvage something from the wreckage. "This is a witch hunt orchestrated by a disgruntled former employee," he insisted, his usual swagger replaced by something feral and desperate. "Emily Carter was terminated for legitimate reasons. She's manipulating the media to..." The interviewer cut him off. "Mr. Wallace, are you denying the SEC charges? The recorded evidence of instructing employees to falsify documents?" "I'm saying Emily Carter." "Sir, you're facing federal fraud charges. Multiple employees have come forward with evidence. Are you really suggesting this is all about one person's vendetta?" Brian's face went red. She was nobody, a marketing director who thought she was better than everyone else. I had every right to... "To what, Mr. Wallace? Fire her for refusing to commit fraud?" The interview ended with Brian storming off set, his microphone still hot as he cursed my name. Jennifer sent me the clip with a single word: beautiful. Monday morning brought the board meeting that would officially end the Wallace dynasty at Novalink. Margaret, who'd become an unexpected ally, called me with the play-by-play. "Robert tried to blame everything on Brian," she said. "Threw his own son under the bus. Said Brian acted without authorization, that he was a rogue element. Did it work?" The FBI had Robert's emails, his recorded conversations, his signed documents. The board voted unanimously. Both Wallaces are permanently banned from any leadership role. But the true finale came Tuesday afternoon. I was in my barely furnished apartment, preparing for my move to Austin, when Jennifer called. "You need to come to Novalink, right now." "Jennifer, I can't. Emily, please." "It's important." Against my better judgment, I drove to the building that had once been my second home. The security guard, Tom, was at the front desk. The same man who'd escorted me out in shame 6 weeks ago. "Ms. Carter," he said, standing up. "I'm sorry. For that day. For not saying anything. You were doing your job, Tom." "No," he said firmly. "I was being a coward. We all were." He handed me a visitor's badge. "Conference room 3. They're waiting." The conference room was packed. My entire former team, Sarah the CTO, The accounting staff Brian had terrorized, even the junior developer he'd made cry. As I walked in, they stood up. All of them. Jennifer spoke first. "We wanted you to see this." On the screen was an email from the new board chairman to all staff. Effective immediately. All terminations and personnel decisions made by Brian Wallace during his tenure are under review. We are particularly interested in reinstating Emily Carter to her previous position with full back pay and a formal apology. "They want you back," Sarah said. "We all want you back." I looked at their faces. Hopeful, apologetic, genuine. These people who'd been my family until they'd let me walk away in disgrace. Part of me wanted to say yes, to reclaim what had been stolen. But I wasn't that person anymore. "Thank you," I said. "This means everything. But I can't come back." "Emily," Jennifer started. "Brian's gone, but this place let him happen. You all watched him destroy me, and you stayed silent because it was safer." I wasn't angry anymore, just honest. "I understand why, but I can't pretend it didn't happen." The room was quiet. Uncomfortable? True. "Where will you go?" Sarah asked. "Austin, a startup that judges people on merit, not bloodlines." I smiled, and this time, it reached my eyes. A clean start. As I turned to leave, Margaret appeared in the doorway. The board member who'd sat silent during my execution now stood with tears in her eyes. "Emily, I failed you. We all did. But you didn't fail. You brought down an empire with nothing but the truth." "I had help," I said, thinking of David, Marcus, Janet Morrison. "No," Margaret said firmly. "They had ammunition. You pulled the trigger." I walked through Novalink one last time, past my old office where a under-renovation sign hung on the door. Brian's corner conference room had been converted back to shared space. His name had been scrubbed from every surface, every system, as if he'd never existed. In the parking lot, I found one final surprise. Brian himself, sitting in his Tesla, watching the building like a ghost haunting his former kingdom. When he saw me, his face contorted with rage. He got out of his car, starting toward me. "You! Stop!" My voice was calm, certain. "You've lost, Brian. Your father's empire is gone. Your reputation is destroyed. You're facing federal charges, and you did it all to yourself. I had everything until you. You had everything because you were born lucky. You lost everything because you were born stupid." I stepped closer, meeting his bloodshot eyes. "I didn't destroy you, Brian. I just showed everyone who you really were." His hands clenched into fists, and for a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. Then his shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him like air from a punctured balloon. "The FBI froze my accounts," he said quietly. "My father won't speak to me. The lawyers say I'm looking at 5 to 10 years. I could have felt sorry for him, could have offered some platitude about redemption or second chances. Instead, I said, good. I left him standing there in the parking lot of the building his father once owned, watching the life he'd inherited slip through his fingers like sand. Tomorrow, I'd drive to Austin, start fresh, build something real. But today, in this moment, I stood tall in a parking lot where I'd once been broken, watching Brian Wallace finally understand what it felt like to lose everything to someone who'd earned nothing. The only difference was, he actually deserved it. 6 months later, I stood outside Novalink Solutions one final time, not as an employee, not as a victim, but as a witness. The building looked the same, glass and steel reaching toward the Colorado sky, but the logo was different. Morrison Tech Solutions gleamed where Novalink once stood. Janet Morrison had bought the company for pennies on the dollar after Wallace Enterprises collapsed, saving 300 jobs in the process. I wasn't there for nostalgia. I was there for the sentencing. Brian Wallace got 7 years federal prison. The news footage showed him in an orange jumpsuit, his salon-styled hair now unkempt, his designer stubble now just desperation. When the judge read the verdict, He'd looked around the courtroom like he was waiting for someone to fix this, to make a call, to remind everyone who his father was. But Robert Wallace wasn't there. He'd fled to Switzerland, his assets frozen, his empire reduced to legal documents and federal indictments. The Wallace name, once etched in marble on buildings across Denver, had become synonymous with corporate fraud. David Miller won a Pulitzer for his investigative series. His final article included a line that still makes me smile. Brian Wallace believed power was inherited. Emily Carter proved it could be earned and taken away. Jennifer now runs the marketing department at Morrison Tech. She offered me a position, VP of Strategic Development, double my old salary. I turned it down. Because I'd learned something in those dark weeks after Brian destroyed my career. I'd learned that revenge isn't about reclaiming what was taken. It's about becoming someone who can't be broken again. My startup in Austin went public last month. We're small, but we're honest. Every hire is based on merit, every promotion is earned, and every single employee knows that speaking truth to power isn't just allowed, it's required. The irony is delicious. Brian wanted to erase me from the corporate world. Instead, he gave me the push I needed to build something better, something his daddy's money could never buy. Respect earned through actual achievement. But that evening, standing outside the building where my professional life had died and been reborn, I wasn't thinking about success or vindication. I was thinking about that moment in the parking lot, 6 weeks after Brian fired me, when I'd told him the truth. I didn't destroy him. I just showed everyone who he really was. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The same mountains I'd stared at from my office window. Planning campaigns, building dreams, never imagining that the real battle would be against someone who thought birthright trumped ability. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Brian. I get out in 6.5 years. You destroyed my life. I'll never forget what you did." I typed back, "Good. I'd hate for you to forget the consequences of your actions. That would mean you learned nothing." Then I blocked his number. He was the past. A cautionary tale about privilege without purpose, power without competence, cruelty without consequence. I had a flight to catch, a company to run, a life to live. As I walked to my rental car, I passed a young woman sitting on the plaza steps, crying into her phone. She wore a Morrison Tech badge and held a cardboard box, the universal sign of corporate termination. "Bad day?" I asked. She looked up, mascara streaming. "My manager just fired me for questioning his strategy. Said I was being difficult. He's the owner's nephew." So, I sat down beside her, remembering my own cardboard box, my own tears, my own moment of feeling powerless against nepotism. "What's your name?" "Ashley." "Ashley, let me tell you something someone should have told me 6 months ago. Sometimes getting fired by an incompetent nepotism hire is the best thing that can happen to your career." I handed her my business card. "When you're ready, give me a call. My company values difficult questions. We consider them essential." Her eyes widened as she read the card. "You're Emily Carter. You're the one who brought down Wallace Enterprises." "No," I corrected. "I'm the one who told the truth. Wallace Enterprises brought down itself." I left her there with my card and something more valuable. Hope that power obtained through birth rather than worth always carries the seeds of its own destruction. My flight took off as the last light faded from the Denver sky. Below, the city sparkled with a million lights, each one a story, a struggle, a dream. Somewhere down there, Brian Wallace was learning to live without his father's name opening doors. Somewhere down there, my former colleagues were building something better from the ashes of Wallace Enterprises. And me? I was flying toward a future I'd earned, carrying the scars of a battle I'd won not through inherited privilege or connections, but through something Brian never understood: the power of truth wielded by someone with nothing left to lose. He fired me because he was the CEO's son. He fell because he was nothing more than that. And that, as they say, is the best revenge. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story of standing up to workplace injustice resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts and experiences. Have you ever dealt with a toxic boss or witnessed nepotism destroy a workplace? Let me know in the comments. Your stories inspire me to keep sharing these tales of truth, justice, and sweet revenge.